Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video, as you can see, we are going to be taking a look at the Mach Studios B-2 Spirit. The B-2 has recently released for the sim, and Mach of course being the same developer that brought us the F-22 previously. It's always great having these unique and interesting aircraft to fly, made available within Microsoft Flight Simulator, and Mach completed their Raptor to a pretty nice standard, so I was very keen to take a look at the B-2 and see what the aircraft has to offer. I'm sure the aircraft needs no introduction to most of you. The Spirit, also commonly known as the Stealth Bomber, is an American heavy strategic bomber with a low radar signature, hence the Stealth moniker. The B-2 is of course quite a unique design. Essentially the aircraft is a flying wing, and whilst capable only of subsonic flight, it does have a substantial range of around 6,000 nautical miles without air-to-air refueling. Today's video is going to be a full review of the aircraft, and for our flight, we are currently on the ground at the Plant 42 Test Center here in Palmdale, California. Plant 42, of course, famous for some of the unique aircraft designs that have come out of it over the years. Today we're going to be flying the airframe Spirit of America, and we're going to be ferrying her over to her new home of Whiteman Air Force Base. As usual, we'll be carrying out a full startup. We'll depart here out of Palmdale. Initially we're going to meet up with the tanker. Not required, but for the sake of interest we'll take on some fuel. We'll then be making the 1,200 mile trip east over towards Whiteman. Again, the B-2 is subsonic, although it can cruise at quite nice high Mach numbers. We should be back on the ground around 2.5 hours after our departure from Palmdale. A slight change of pace for today's video, since we do have plenty of time to kill in the cruise. We'll cover off most of the review during the cruise section of the flight. So just the shutdown and a very brief conclusion once we're back on the ground at our new home. As always, I really hope you enjoy the video. If you do, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. If you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. Okay, so today then we find ourselves in the cockpit of the Mach Studios B-2 Spirit. As discussed, we're currently on the ground at the Plant 42 Test Center here in Palmdale, and we're going to be taking the Spirit of America here on her delivery flight over to Whiteman Air Force Base. As usual, we are going to be running through a full startup, so running through the interior inspection checks initially. The ejection sequence handle is set through to auto. The clock is set and running, the throttles are in the idle position. Anti-skid switch is selected on, the gear handle is selected down, taxi lights and landing lights are selected off. Speed brake lever is set through to retracted, the pitot static heat switch is selected off. Cabin pressure gauge is checked, the aerial refuel selection is set through to closed. Emergency comm switches are set through to normal. For the comm channel here we'll come on to comm 1. And we'll just do the same here as well on the mission commander side. Set through to comm 1. The position lights can go through to bright and steady. We'll leave the anti-collision light off for the time being. Cockpit lighting can stay as it is. The cabin pack switches are selected off, the equipment pack switches are set through to auto. The windshield defog, we'll set that through to min. Windshield anti-ice will leave off, engine anti-ice is in the auto position. The cabin temperature selector, we'll set that through to auto. And we'll just crank up the cabin airflow a little bit here as well. The CMD CG switch is set through to normal, the CFG limit there will set through to 28%. The fuel system interconnects closed both there on the left and the right. The fuel system set through to auto. And the fuel dump switch set through to closed and guarded. The flight control battery switch is selected off, same as well for the utility battery switch. All 4 generators are selected off. That is the interior inspection checklist complete. So we are now ready to power up the jet. We'll just confirm with the ground crew that we are clear to do so. First things first, the flight control battery switch can go on.
Caution, warning, warning.
We'll cancel the master warning.
Caution, caution.
And as well the master caution, we can disregard those for now. Utility battery switch is selected on. On the right hand MDU, we'll just come onto the elect page. In terms of voltages, we're looking for between 24 and 28 volts, showing 25 volts there across the board. Once again, just confirming the landing gear handle there is selected down. We do now have 3 greens. Parking brake is verified as set. We'll come down to the FMC. Onto the flight plan page, we can begin building that up. So as discussed, we're departing out of Palmdale, which is Kilo, Pa, Mike, Delta. Initially tracking out towards the Las Vegas VOR, which is Lima, Alpha, Sierra. We'll then be on towards the Dove Creek VOR, which is Delta Victor Charlie. Then on towards Hugo, which is Hotel Golf Oscar. And finally onto the Salina VOR, which is Sierra Lima November. And as discussed, bound for Whiteman, which is Kilo Sierra Zulu Lima. That's the flight plan inserted in terms of our performance. Initially today we're going up to flight level 200 to go meet up with the tanker. Later on during the flight we'll be climbing up towards flight level 470, so we've got out pre-selected there at 200. And we'll target an initial vertical speed during the climb of 2,500 feet per minute. Back onto the performance page for the speed, initially targeting 250 knots below 10. And for now then we'll just leave ourselves on the flight plan page. So the FMC has been programmed, we've set up the initial autopilot and auto throttle parameters. That has us good now in terms of the setup. We are now cleared to start the APUs. We have two APUs on the B2, so we'll start the left first. Simply hitting the start switch. Come back onto the engine page. And you can see there the APU spooling up, quite quick to do so. So the APU now running there on the left, we'll do the same on the right. Okay, so we do now have both APUs up and running. Continuing on with the checklist, the DC BTR switch. That should be set through to closed, it is, but that's not currently modelled on the aircraft. The engine bleed air switches, we'll take 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you'll notice you can actually hear an increase there in the airflow, so again, really nice work on the sounds from Echo 19. Presumably now the APUs are providing bleed air to the jet. The fuel quantities, once again, just confirming we have 83,000 pounds on board. The distribution is good, the tank's balanced. In terms of the hydraulics, once again, just confirming the pressures and quantities look good. For the brake accumulator pressure, that is checked. Entry door hatch is closed, ladder is stowed, crew hatch has been confirmed closed. Ordnance bay doors, once again, are confirmed closed. And for the engine auxiliary air intake doors, those are set through to auto. So we are now good for the start, just confirming with the ground crew we are cleared to start. We'll take the beacon light, or the anti-collision light here, through to both. Both APUs up and running. We actually have the mode to the engines ahead of the start according to the checklist, so we'll start 2 and 3 here in sequence. We do actually have an auto start feature as well, which will start all 4 engines at once. I don't know whether or not that's true to life, perhaps that's some sort of QRA functionality. So we're waiting here till we're up through 20% on the N2s before we actually start the engines themselves. Just approaching 20%. And there's 20. So again, we could hit auto and that would start all 4 engines at the same time in sequence, but we'll start 2 and 3. We've got 2 APUs, so it makes sense to start 2 engines at a time, I think. So engaging the starter for 2 and 3. And we'll head outside, listen to those General Electric F-118s as they run up. Okay, so we do now have a good start there on both engine 2 and engine 3. We've just selected number 2 and number 3 generator on there as well. Already motoring 1 and 4, so we've got up through 20% there on the N2. Again, we'll engage the starters for number 1. and as well their number 4. So just monitoring engines as they spool up. You can see there we do have a good light off, the TBT coming up. We'll monitor that. The oil pressures as well coming up. They look like we peaked there around 470 degrees on the turbine blade temperature. In terms of the EMSP, showing okay there on 1, 2, 3 and 4, which is what we're looking for. Caution there just for the generators, so we'll take generator 1 and generator 4 on. We've got all 4 generators selected on. We do have 4 good starts. We'll cancel the master caution. And on the elect page now showing 28 volts across the board. We can shut down our APUs, so we'll hit stop both on the left and as well there on the right. The before taxi checks, once again, just confirming the ordnance bay doors are closed, engine instruments are checked. Again, coming back to the flight controls and hydraulics page, looking good there on the hydraulics. And same there as well on the flight controls. It is worth noting, unfortunately, we're going to have an FCS warning there throughout the flight. Unfortunately, that seems to be a bit of a issue with Airshow Assistant coming into play. We are going to be using that, of course, later on for the air-to-air refueling. So we'll just have to live with the FCS warning for our flight here today. Hopefully Top Mac will get that fixed up at some point. So FCS has been checked for the IFF. Down to the FMC, we'll squawk mode to Sierra. The IFF switch is set through to normal. FMC programming has been complete, the altimeters are set. We've got a QNH today of 30.44. That aerodrome elevation not entirely accurate here for Palmdale, that's just due to a little bit of video editing trickery. Once again for the fuel, £83,000 on board the jet, within limits on the C of G. The cabin pack switches can now go on. And again, nice increase there in airflow as we do so. Pitot static heat switch is selected on. Engine anti-ice again set through to auto. Windshield defog switch will leave as is. Engine auxiliary air intake doors can now go through to auto. The alternate speed brake, that is set through to normal. Alternate trim is set through to normal. And again for the aerial refueling slipway, that is set through to closed. Entry door, again just confirming that is closed. The ladder is stowed. Crew hatch we have verified closed. According to the ground crew, the wheel chocks have been removed. And we'll just take the taxi lights on. Through to bright. We are now ready for the taxi. So taxiing left here initially out of the hangar facility. We're going to be making our way this morning down to runway 07 here at Palmdale. Okay, so we are now down at the threshold for Palmdale's runway 07. We'll just carry out the before takeoff checklist here ahead of the departure. So for the moment the park brake is set. Once again, unfortunately we do have the FCS warning there. Again, I think that's as a result of a conflict with Airshow Assistant. Nevertheless, we'll carry out the FCS bite test.
Caution.
Just cancelling the master caution. And as you can see, our split drag rudders there running through the bite test, essentially moving through fully open and fully closed. And the bite test is complete. We'll do the same now with the speed brakes. So manually selecting those through to fully open. And we'll close those up once again. The oxygen switch set through to auto. The regulator switches are both set through to normal. On both my side and on the mission commander side now we've armed up our ejection seats. The position lights are set through to flash. Landing lights are selected on, same there as well for the taxi lights. Anti-skid switch is confirmed on. The engine auxiliary air intake doors are set through to auto. And you can see there, those are open above the engines. IFF switch again set through to normal. Helmet visors are closed. For the CAS messages, again it is just that FCS warning we'll have to disregard. For the takeoff itself then, the park brake can come off. We'll just hold the jet on the brakes. And bring up the power. Initially we'll come through to 50% here on the M1s. And the engine parameters look good, off the brakes, and all the way through now to full power. Excellent sounds as always from Echo 19, really nice to see. Okay, so thrusters set, engine parameters look good. Airspeed fairly slow here to increase. The B2 is a little bit lethargic actually during the takeoff roll, but it feels really nice on the rudders, feels excellent as well during rotation. Just up through 100 knots. We'll rotate at 140. So again, as you can see, chewing up quite a bit of runway. There's 140, back on the stick. And we are airborne. We'll pitch initially for 10 degrees nose up. We do have positive climb, we'll bring up the gear. Interestingly, bringing up the gear there actually induces a master caution. That seems a little bit unlikely to me, but it could be true to life for the real world jets. So again, pitching for 10 degrees nose up. You can see the aircraft accelerating quite nicely there. And we'll start a left turn now to track 045. Just coming back as well towards climb thrust. We'll go for around 93% M1. So far so good. The B2 is actually really nice to hand fly. Very smooth on the controls. Feels weighty and stable. Again, really nice during the rotation. So initially we're going to let that speed pick up towards 250 knots. We'll just manually fly up here through 10,000 feet. And then we'll check out the autopilot, which seems to work pretty nicely as well. They're looking good there, 10 degrees nose up, still slowly accelerating, just coming up through 5,500 feet. Currently retrieving around 3,000 feet per minute in terms of our vertical speed. We'll take the taxi lights off. We'll just hold the landing lights here till we're up through 10. So for the after takeoff checks, the gear is up, lights are out, taxi lights are off, nav lights and landing lights will leave on for the time being. Throttles are set for the climb, engine parameters are checked, cabin pressure is checked, altimeter will leave on the QNH for the time being. We'll obviously set that once we go through flight level 180. Autopilot, again, we'll just hold here till we're up through 10,000. Just coming up through 8. And again, still achieving around 3,000 feet per minute, so less than a minute here to go till we're up through 10. As I said though, overall the B2 actually really nice hand fly, very enjoyable. And the aircraft definitely feels unique in the sim. We'll see that as well during the landing. The aircraft really likes to float during the landing, and I believe that is true to life for the real world jet, at least according to Top Mach. So up through 9,500 feet, we'll continue the climb, we're not going to level off. Once we reduce that vertical speed, we'll get the auto throttle in. Once we're above 10 as well, of course, we can accelerate beyond 250 knots. So there's 10,000. We'll come on to the RNAV page initially. We'll come on to the heading page. We'll go heading lock. We'll take the Autopilot master. For the out there, again, pre-selected flight level 200. We'll go vertical speed lock. That'll bring us back down to 2,500 feet per minute. And for the auto throttle, we'll just again select the speed. We'll come for a climb speed now of 400 knots initially. We'll bring that back, of course, later on to meet up with the tanker. So 400 knots. And we'll take the auto throttle here as well. Back onto the flight plan page again. We are nicely established here as well on our nav track, inbound towards Las Vegas. We've got about 150 miles to run currently. Just come out here on the range. And again on the RNAV page, so we've got nav source selected through to GPS. And we'll go with nav lock. So the jet will now fly our planned course, continuing here in the climb up towards 2,500 feet. Up through 10 now, accelerating up towards 400 knots. We'll take the landing lights off. And a little bit unusual here, but we'll take the nav lights off as well. Those do seem to produce some drag. They extend out from the wing. So we'll hold those for now since we're picking up speed, and therefore, of course, drag. Up through 300 knots, up through 14,000 feet. And still maintaining the QNH just for another 4,000 feet or so. You can see there on the FMA we've got autopilot couple. And 400 knots pre-selected. Planning to level off here at flight level 200 initially to meet the tanker. Ahead of our rendezvous with the tanker then, we'll just briefly look at some of the other functionality here in the cockpit. So for the CID, you'll notice I've left that powered off throughout the flight. I personally don't like the screen very much. I think it looks quite unphotorealistic versus the rest of the jet. There's certainly nothing wrong with it though. If we power it up, you can see you get basic parameters here on the SFID screen. So we have airspeed, PFD, altitude as well, vertical speed, basically all of the information that we have there on the MDUs. As well, we've got engine parameters and fuel flows. The info page seems to just be a duplication here of the core system, so we've got our warnings and our cautions. CTSD doesn't seem to have very much to offer at all. IFR is basically just a default Microsoft Flight Simulator map, which of course will be useful to many users, but again, I just think it looks unrealistic and therefore prefer to leave it off. Lastly, the text functionality is quite nice. You have built-in checklists. There's no built-in in-sim checklists, but I'm using the paper checklists today for the flight that are available via the manual. So that's it in terms of the CID functionality. In terms of the onboard tablet, again, fairly basic in terms of what it offers, but there are some nice options. So we have the ability to display the crew internally. We've already seen that, and we'll see a little bit more of that later on. We can adjust the mission commander position, so currently he's of course in the right hand seat. You can also have him resting down the back and even on the toilet. Again, we'll look at those later on. You can select onboard weapons if you do have the mod installed. You can download that separately if you're a PC user. No weapons today since we're carrying out a ferry flight. And as well, you can select externally RBF tags, wheel chocks, as well various ground equipment, which we'll of course see through the video. Lastly, for the active MFDs, you can select both, or you can have either side active just to save a little bit on performance. And as well for the map page, again here you can just adjust the map settings which relate to the onboard nav display. So again, pretty limited options there on the tablet, but nevertheless nice functionality to have. Just approaching now flight level 200, 400 knots. As mentioned, we're going to be meeting up with the tanker, rendezvousing with him at flight level 200. Not that we need to, we do have plenty of fuel here on board already, our 80,000 pounds, more than enough to get us over towards Whiteman. So again, for now, maintaining 400 knots, flight level 200, we'll slow up once we rendezvous with our KC-46. We'll top off the tanks and continue eastbound.
24. Go back to center. 10. 8. 6. Further aft as you go, there's 4. Get you to come forward 2, please. Move forward. Position. Down to 37. Moving down. 26. Just go back to center. 12.
back.
Copy that. We'll call Bravo 12 complete. We'll step to card H1, continuity check.
Okay, so here we are then, making our way inbound towards our KC-46. As you can see, we've got about £75,000 of fuel on board the jet, which again is more than enough to make our way over towards Whiteman Air Force Base. But I thought we'd try a spot of air-to-air refueling, firstly because I'm pretty terrible at air-to-air refueling with the boom in DCS. I thought it'd be interesting to try it here in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Secondly as well, of course, it's going to be interesting to see here how the Top Mach Studios B-2 actually handles the whole affair. So just coming up behind the boom, but now keeping it well above the aircraft. Just making sure there we don't put the aircraft into a climb. Manoeuvring the aircraft broadly into position. And in just a moment's time we should be able to start using the lights there on the aircraft for guidance. So just nudging the throttles forward, nudging the aircraft forward. Okay, we do now have the lights. So looking good in terms of our vertical position, just needing to move the jet forwards. And just being a little bit aggressive there in terms of our manoeuvring. But we do have contact, we are now taking fuel, and now established there in a pretty nice position. As I mentioned with my previous air-to-air refueling efforts with a probe and drogue, not really looking at the lights too much there. Obviously we are using those for guidance, but primarily just using the picture out of the window. So placing the coaming there just behind the engine cowls of the KC-46. And looks there as well as though if we put our viewpoint just above the lights, just above the beacon there of the 767, that'll keep us nicely in position. So for now, just making very minor control inputs, minor corrections. Just coming up through £100,000 now on the fuel. We're looking to take on around £160,000 in total. So taking about £80,000 here from the tanker. Overall, as you can see then, the functionality of the Top Mach B-2 is pretty good in terms of air-to-air refueling. It works very nicely with the boom. As well, if you actually move the refuel switch into the override position, you can tank fuel without the need for example here, the airshow assistant tanker. The aircraft will just automatically tank, effectively in a ghost form. So either way you can top up. And tanking is a pretty important part of B-2 operations, the aircraft known for its endurance. You can get around 6,000 miles out of the aircraft on a single tank of fuel, which is pretty impressive. And the endurance, as Top Mach state, is almost unlimited once you factor in air-to-air refueling. I believe the longest known mission of the B-2 is some 44 hours, all the way out from the continental United States, and tracking the long way round up into Afghanistan. So, as I said, first time trying boom refueling here in Microsoft Flight Simulator. Once again, Airshow Assistant doing a really nice job with the functionality. If memory serves me correctly, the DCS boom is pretty static, pretty fixed, which means you really have to nail the connection. Whereas the Airshow Assistant boom will actually move to meet the aircraft, particularly, of course, if you're trying at the lower levels. So, for example, Rookie, you do have a lot of room to maneuver. Today we're flying our air-to-air refueling in the Pro mode, and of course you also have Ace. So as I say, that boom actually just coming to meet the inlet itself, I think makes things that little bit more realistic. It does give you a little bit of wiggle room, and as you can see, we're now holding station quite nicely. Everything working out quite well. So far, I've got to say, pretty impressed with the Top Mach Studios B-2. It's obviously not a completely accurate rendition of the aircraft, but overall, I think a nice analogue in terms of making you feel as though you are operating a B-2 Spirit. So that, coupled with the systems and the sounds, overall I think makes for a fairly immersive experience. Anyway, £166,000 now on board the jet. We have topped off the tanks, as you can see there from the schematic. We'll move away from the probe, move out to the right of the KC-46, and just ease off the throttles again, moving away now from the tanker. Once we're clear of the tanker, we're going to be making a climb here up to flight level 470 for the cruise. Initially climbing at 400 knots, we'll transition to Mach 0.90. Tanks all topped up, we'll close up the refueling inlet once again. And as discussed, it's going to be about 2 hours now en route, so plenty of time here. I think that would be a great opportunity to talk through the product in a little bit more detail. I'll give you my overall thoughts and opinions on the B-2. That will save us covering it off at the end of the video. So we are now established up here in the cruise at flight level 470, doing Mach 0.9 currently, and as I mentioned, I thought this would be a good time to discuss the product. We'll cover things off in a little bit more detail. Firstly, touching on what I think of the Mach Studios B-2 with regards to the modelling and texturing. Overall, as usual, I think the product speaks for itself visually. Mach have done a very nice job with the B-2. Externally, the aircraft really looks the part, at least to someone like me who isn't much of a rivet counter. Similarly, internally, the detailing is pretty nice overall, and the layout as well as the modelling does look to be pretty close to the real-world jet. So far as the texturing goes, I would say the external of the aircraft, again, very nice, not really too much I can fault there. Internally, I would say that the cockpit texturing does look a little bit more cartoonish versus photorealistic. The texturing isn't bad by any means, it's high resolution, pretty detailed, and very sharp, very precise. As compared though with the real-world aircraft, there is certainly a noticeable difference between the texturing of the Mach B-2 versus the real-world jet. One other really nice addition internally, as you've seen, we do also get model pilots. You can have the option there for both the mission commander and as well yourself. That's really nice. I think I've said it now in many videos, but I think that's a great option to have within the sim. It does make the aircraft just that much more immersive. With regards to the flight model of the B-2, that is of course very hard to speculate on. What I can say though is that the aircraft certainly doesn't have any vices, no particularly strange behaviours. As I mentioned, very smooth on the controls, nice and weighty, felt great throughout most of the flight. Very enjoyable to hand fly, and as we discussed during the approach, somehow, to my mind at least, Mach Studios have managed to make the aircraft feel like it is a flying wing. Not a criticism at all here of the flight model, but it is worth noting if you're perhaps not all that familiar with the B-2. Don't expect that if you are purchasing the aircraft that you're going to be getting fighter jet performance. You are, of course, ultimately flying a subsonic bomber. And again, the aircraft does feel as though you're flying one. The B-2 feels much closer to your average commercial jet than it does to any sort of fast jet. With regards to the aircraft systems, we certainly couldn't say that the B-2 is a study level jet, nor I think would we expect it to be. I believe that much of the aircraft and its systems are still classified, so it would essentially be impossible to accurately model the B-2 with regards to systems. Similarly, of course, as well, with Microsoft Flight Simulator's lack of weapon support, you are missing a vital function of the B-2. That being said, once more, I do think that Mach Studios have done a very nice job of creating some sort of an analogue of the B-2 which you can operate. And I believe as well, I may have read or heard that at some point they will actually be fleshing out the weapons functionality just a little bit further within the sim. So overall, the systems that have been modelled, I'm sure some of those are a best guess or even artistic license in terms of how they've been created. And at any rate, I would probably say that the systems modelling is fairly mid-tier. Most of the switches in the cockpit are clickable, but it feels as though there's not too much depth behind them having been modelled. The sounds of the jet are certainly another strength of the product. I think, again, those speak for themselves. The sound pack has been created by Echo 19, who, if you've seen my last couple of videos, you'll know that I've been incredibly impressed with within Microsoft Flight Simulator. They do a very nice job of creating immersive, authentic sound packs, and they are one of the very few sound developers within Microsoft Flight Simulator that really does a stellar job with military jets. I think there are still a couple of areas that could be tweaked on the sounds. For example, during the flyby, the latter stages of the sound set do cut in a little bit abruptly. There are as well just one or two switches within the cockpit that are lacking click sounds in certain directions. Overall though, the sounds are a triumph and certainly make operating the B-2 just that much more enjoyable. In terms of product extras, overall the Spirit does come with quite a nice range of features. As you will have probably seen from the introduction, there are a whole host of external fixtures and fittings, which is great to see. As well, at the moment we do have very basic weapons implementation, again only available to PC users via an external download. And as we've already discussed, we also have the internally modelled crew, with the ability as well to move the mission commander around the cockpit so he can be resting or even on the toilet. A comical feature in some senses perhaps, but it does actually allow for just that little bit more immersion if you really want to carry out those longer missions with the B-2. We also saw the aircraft does come with an included onboard tablet, although the functionality there is fairly basic. It would be nice, for example, to have an integrated real-world map or navigraph functionality with the tablet. And with regards to the weapons functionality, I do hope that Mach Studios flesh that out a little bit further. It would be really nice to have a much wider selection of weapons available, and as well more customization via the tablet. And of course, if they can figure out a way to make the onboard ordnance droppable, that would be a really great feature. The included documentation with the product is generally very decent. You get a manual which includes checklists, details about the aircraft, basic information about the aircraft systems, as well a little bit of information regarding how to fly the jet. It's by no means the most detailed documentation that I've come across, but I think very much in line again with the level of fidelity that Mach Studios are looking to offer. Lastly, in terms of the aircraft's FPS, I was losing a few frames here with the Mach Studios B-2. I was getting around 44 frames per second with the B-2 versus 60 plus with the default Cessna 152 under similar conditions. So my frames are capped out at 60, at the very least I was losing around 15 FPS. In summary then, I think Mach Studios have done a very nice job with the jet. We'll continue to look at the aircraft here as we make our way inbound towards Whiteman Air Force Base. We are now approaching our top descent point, so we'll get the aircraft coming down fairly shortly. Transitioning here from Mach 0.9 as we're doing in the cruise, we'll come down to about 350 knots during the descent, slowing up of course towards 250 as we come through 10,000. We've got about another 160 miles to run towards destination, so we'll head back to the cockpit and we'll commence the approach. So, welcome back to the flight deck of the B-2. As you've probably already seen, we've started our descent. We are just coming down through 10,000 feet now. Speed back at 250 knots. As we're coming through 10, we'll take the position lights back through to flash. We'll take the landing light on here as well, just cancelling the master caution, and we'll do the same as well here for the taxi light. So for the cause there, we've got the flight control system warning. Again, expecting to see that, unfortunately. We've got the taxi and landing light cautions there as well. Approaching 9,000 feet, about 40 miles to run towards the field, so looking good here in terms of our vertical profile. We've still got some speed to lose. And currently maintaining heading of 085, we're going to be making somewhat of a right-hand base leg here for Whiteman's runway 19. Initially, we'll try and fly the ILS. So for the ILS, we've got that tuned up 108.5, India Mike X-Ray Juliet. And for the course there on the OBS, we've got a course pre-selected of 190 degrees. Currently maintaining a VS of minus 1200 feet per minute, 300 knots over the ground, so doing slightly less than a 3-degree profile. We are showing high on the glide, but again, we've got a bit of a dogleg here to make our way around towards runway 19. Field should be out at our 2 o'clock. A little bit tricky to make out here at the moment. I say that we'll try and fly the ILS. So far with the jet, I've had fairly mixed results. It's quite difficult often to get it to capture, and even when it does, it often isn't very accurate in terms of how the aircraft actually flies the ILS, so that is one weakness of the product. Anyway, in terms of our descent checks for the hydraulic system, quantities and pressures look good. Electrical system is checked. With the gas there again, the flight control system warning, taxi and landing light cautions. With the fuel and C of G, as you can see, still plenty of fuel here on board the jet, 133,000 pounds give or take. I'm sure that's far more than would typically be realistic here for a landing. But again, just wanting to demonstrate the air-to-air refueling functionality during the flight. We burned down through most of the aft fuel tanks now, so only 4,100 pounds left in each of those. Otherwise, though, the fuel is good. Plenty of fuel, of course, if we need to make a missed approach or a diversion. Okay, we'll come now onto a heading of 150 degrees. And we can start reducing the speed here as well, so we'll come back towards 180 knots. We'll try and get ourselves established here on the ILS before we arm the approach, just again to give the aircraft a fighting chance to actually capture. So continuing on with the approach checks, the IFF and transponder are set as required, landing data has been computed and checked. Altimeters are set, we've got a QNH of 30.18. Engine anti-ice is set through to auto, windshield defog set through to minimum. Engine auxiliary intake doors set through to auto. Helmet visors have been lowered, interior lighting is set as required, nav lights are set through to flash. Again, we'll just adjust the heading. And harnesses are secure, that is the descent checklist complete. So we should see the light come in very shortly. We'll arm up the approach, see how we go there with the jet, down through 6,000 feet. And now showing around 25 miles to run. So we should come onto the glide slope fairly shortly. Here comes the localizer. So just confirming. As you can see, we do have the approach armed. On a nice shallow intercept there as well. And as you can see, it doesn't look as though the jet's going to capture there, so I'm not really sure what's going on. We'll take out the autopilot, we'll fly the rest of the approach manually. In terms of the approach and landing checks, we'll get some of those out of the way. So the altimeters are checked and set, localizer frequency and course were checked. The landing gear, we'll hold that for the time being. Landing lights are on, taxi lights are on. We'll get ourselves established back on final here for runway 19. Showing a little bit high here on the glide. Looking pretty good here though on the pappies. So we'll split the difference. We'll just stay about 1 dot high here on the glide slope for now. We'll get a gear caution around 3,000 feet, so we'll take the gear down now. And again, getting that warning as we take the gear down. We've got 3 reds currently. So we'll hold 180. For now, we'll decelerate back towards 150 knots during the latter stages of the approach. And quite interesting with the B-2, apparently we don't need much of a flare during the landing. Apparently we want to roll the thrust off around the outer marker. And taking the speed brakes actually during the flare through to around 50%. And that'll bleed off enough energy to put the aircraft onto the runway, again with a very minimal flare. So we'll see how we go with that. Again, we are pretty heavy weight, so we're looking at around 150 knots for our V approach today. Thrust at the moment around 70%. We'll take out the auto thrust. We'll just set 70%. Still looking good here on the Pappy, still a little bit high on the glide. We'll just come off the thrust now. We'll let that roll back towards 150 knots. Just coming down through 3,000 feet, so we do have gear down and 3 greens. Once again though, the aircraft very nice to hand fly. I'm sure it's using a fairly generic flight model, i.e. a tube with some wings on it and a typical tail configuration. I believe that's all that's really possible in Microsoft Flight Simulator without significant custom flight modelling, but overall TopMac have somehow managed to make the aircraft, at least to my mind, feel like a flying wing. Some of that might be psychological, but overall again, I think the aircraft does feel unique, it is nice to fly, it does feel weighty. Okay, so still a little bit faster on the speed, we'll keep rolling off the thrust, 170 knots. And looks like we'll have the aircraft touching down just ahead of losing the daylight conditions. So 170 knots now on the speed, a little bit low here on the Pappy. There's 2 whites, 2 reds. And once again, as is often the case in the sim, the Pappy and the glide slope not really lining up. Once more, I'm not really sure what the issue is there with the ILS. I've had it capture under different circumstances, so the aircraft will capture, and indeed it will fly the ILS, but as I mentioned, not particularly accurately, so you certainly don't want to be following it all the way down to the runway. But at any rate, much more interesting and enjoyable to hand fly these sorts of machines. Okay, off the thrust again, really wanted to get that speed now back towards 150 knots. Still showing faster on the angle of attack indicator currently. So repeating myself, but we'll just cut the thrust on short final. Not much of a flare here for the landing. And taking the spoilers as we come across the threshold and into the flare maneuver as it were, although again not really flaring the aircraft. Okay, good now on the speed, looking pretty good here as well in terms of the vertical profile. Still showing a little bit faster on the angle of attack indicator, but as I say, we are pretty heavy. Okay, on target. So nicely established, a little bit low. Rolling off that thrust. Still going to put a little bit of back pressure in there on the stick. There's touchdown. We'll slowly derotate the nose wheel. And onto the runway. No reverse thrust in the jet it seems, so we'll just very gently start braking. And we can vacate down at the end, off on the right. Okay, so we just vacated runway 19. We are now taxiing into Spirit of America's new home here at Whiteman Air Force Base. For the afterlanding checks, the landing light is selected off. We'll leave the taxi light in the bright position for the time being. Position lights can go back through to steady. Transponder is selected off. The pitot and static heat is selected off. And for the windshield anti-ice there as well, once again that is selected off. Speed brakes are retracted. The ejection seats we can now disarm, so both on my side and as well here on the mission commander's side. Just cancelling the caution. Another B-2 there off the right of our aircraft. We'll get parked up just in front here of the vacant hangar building, so onto the brakes. And looks like we'll be parked up here just before we lose the last of the daylight. So aircraft stationary, the park brake can go on for the shutdown checks. Anti-skid switch is selected off, again just cancelling the master caution. Ground crew intercom has been connected, the chocks are installed, the taxi light is off. Position lights will set through to retracted. We'll leave the anti-collision light on for the time being. Engine auxiliary air intake doors will set through to close. Ordnance bay doors and go through to open. Cabin pack switches are selected off. We'll take the bleed air switches off here as well. We'll open up the door entry in just a moment's time. The throttles are in the idle position. We can now shut down the 4 engines. We'll just start up the APUs here ahead of the shutdown, just to give the aircraft some electrical power. So good APU there on the left, same as well there on the right. And shutting down all 4 engines. We'll just hit the stop on 1, 2, 3 and 4. The anti-collision light switch is selected off. DC BTR switch should now be selected through to open, but again not currently modelled. Ejection seat arming levers are both set through to disarmed. The flight control battery switch is selected off. And the utility battery switch is off. That is the shutdown checks complete here on the ground at Whiteman. So there you go guys, I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Top Mach Studios Northrop B-2 Spirit. Once again, overall I think the aircraft is a very nice effort from Top Mach Studios, as well as the sounds a very nice effort from Echo 19. These sorts of aircraft are of course never going to be entirely accurate given the number of systems that are still classified, but if you do want some sense of operating a B-2, then again I think Top Mach Studios Spirit is a very nice offering. Hopefully there will still be more tweaks and improvements to come to the aircraft. I suspect that probably will be the case. Top Mach have been pretty diligent with their F-22. That aircraft has certainly seen significant improvement since release. The aircraft is undoubtedly already good fun to fly and certainly a very interesting machine to have available within the sim. Once again, I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a like. If you want to see more content from the channel, then please do consider subscribing as well. And if you would like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. As always, a very big thank you to my channel members and patrons for all of your support and making this content possible. To all of you, I hope you are having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.